Hello, I'm Lord Stockton. I'm helping to organise and fronting David Amess's virtual book tour. Great deal more comfortable than real book tours, which as a publisher I know all about. David is a wonderful man, and he is the living embodiment of what is good about politics and Parliament. David went into politics not because he wanted to become rich or famous or even notorious, but because he wanted to help people. And he believed that the best way he could help them was to be their representative on the council, in the constituency, and in the nation at large. He has always done this with only the very best intentions. As a result, he is admired and is a friend of almost everyone, even the civil servants who he badgers endlessly about Southend becoming a city. They admire him, albeit a little ruefully. I don't think that there's anyone in politics today who is as straightforward and as honourable as David is. Finally, I think all I can say is that I am very fond of David, and I'm very proud to be able to call him my friend.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event. Thank you for joining. If at the end of my being interviewed you would like to ask me any questions, please put those questions in the live chat section. And if you would like to purchase the book, there is a link that you can find below. So please go to that. You can get the book from Ian Dale at Politicos. You can get it from Amazon. You can also get it direct from Lueth, the publishers. But finally, you could also get it directly from myself. I've got a number of my books in the House of Commons, and through your own Member of Parliament, if you tell them that you would like the book, I'm sure they'd be only too pleased to collect them directly from my office in the House of Commons. I hope you enjoy the evening.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by two of my colleagues this evening who are going to quiz me about this book that I've written, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. So I've got my two colleagues, Maria Caulfield and Dr. Julian Lewis. So Maria's sort of going to take the part of Oprah Winfrey. I hope you won't. And Julian, who's going to be Michael Parkinson, and I hope you will. And the idea, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to ask me questions about the book. It's not really a memoir yet, because I'm only halfway through my political career. And frankly, I haven't been nasty about my colleagues in this. And it's only when you voluntarily leave the building that you can really tell like it is. But the book really is detailing my time up to now in Parliament and outlining a few of the historic events. And from you, the listeners and viewers' point of view, all the money go to charities, which my colleagues will ask me about at the end of the interview. So who wants to go first?
Ladies first.
I'm happy to start. I mean, I'm fascinated because although I've been an MP for a relatively short time, it's been quite an eventful period with Brexit and COVID. But obviously, you've seen huge changes over the years. Many prime ministers, speakers in the House. Just kind of how do you feel that things have changed? Obviously, it's quite eventful at the moment, and the last kind of few years have been. But it's just interesting to get your perspective of how that fits into kind of the rest of your time, because I know when I've been talking to people like Sir Nicholas Soames in the past, he was, saying that actually the period in the last Parliament was one of the most difficult he recognised. So just for me as a new MP, how would you put, say, the last 3 or 4 years in context to kind of the rest of the time you spent in Parliament?
Well, Maria, putting it bluntly, the last 3 or 4 years in terms of Parliament have been absolute rubbish. Ever since the 12th of December 2019, we haven't had a proper Parliament. No one's ever lived through a pandemic before. That's been difficult. And the Parliament before that, 2017 to 19, was absolutely dreadful with all the shenanigans over Brexit. And if I say to our viewers and listeners, I don't want to sound like Victor Meldrew, but I do sound like Victor Meldrew, and I'm very careful to say it's not as good as it was. So it has changed beyond all recognition. And in certain respects, yes, it's a bit better, but in other respects, it's certainly not better. And I think the biggest changes would be, we've recently had this debate on restoration and renewal, and I know which camp I'm in. I don't want to move out of the building. And if anyone's going to move out, it's going to have to be the unelected House, but that's a different discussion to have. So the building, Maria, is sort of the same, although it's dilapidated, but the people now who become members of Parliament throughout my 4 decades have definitely changed. They look different, they sound different, their backgrounds are different, and their skills are different. Now, people will think I'm old-fashioned, but I think our Parliament is the best in the world. I've been told off by calling it the mother of parliaments, but I think it is the best Parliament in the world. And when I first became an MP in 1983, the chambers was always full by and large. We had Prime Minister's questions on a Tuesday and Thursday for 15 minutes, which was absolutely electric. I think Prime Minister's question time is a complete waste, really. I don't think much comes out of it. And obviously during the coronavirus pandemic, it's been without any great atmosphere at all. And of course, we used to sit on a Monday to Thursday, starting at 2:30 in the afternoon and go on to the wee hours in the morning. Now, we started at 2:30 to allow ministers to get around the country, do things in their constituencies. And yes, it is true, a number of colleagues had second jobs, but that didn't mean they didn't put in more than an 8-hour day. And we always were there on a Friday from 9:30 to 3 o'clock. Well, all that has changed completely. Tony Blair, among the many charges that I found him guilty on, was messing up Parliament completely through guillotine, truncating any debate. When I think the power of oratory was all important, well, it doesn't feel like that anymore, Maria. When someone's name came up on the Annunciator, people would cram into the chamber to listen to them. Nowadays, I get the impression when someone names comes up on the Annunciator, unless they're on one of these call lists, they all scarper out of the chamber. So even when we get back to a situation when we're not socially distancing, the atmosphere isn't there as it once was. Now, I fully accept, Maria, that times have changed. So the skills that you need, you've got to be good on technology, you've got to be good on the sound bites and all that. But I do think Parliament, isn't it about speaking? Isn't it about a bit of oratory? Isn't it about persuading people of arguments? And I think we've lost that skill a bit. And the final thing I would say, I do think that it's good to welcome the mix of MPs that we have now from all different backgrounds. I mean, this huge number of colleagues from the Red Wall, it seems to me as if they're in a sort of contest who's lower than being born in the gutter. You know, I'm more working class than you are, so that's changed a lot. And it's fantastic that there are so many more ladies in Parliament. But what I don't like are people being, how can I put it, engineered into constituency seats without, as I see it, having had a real job and having convictions. I'm a conviction politician, and I think it's a great honour to represent the Conservative Party, and you should believe in our principles. But I'm going to shut up now and let Julian ask me something.
Well, I'll take you up on that point you've just made about conviction politicians, David. I've always felt that there is a spectrum running from conviction politicians to career politicians. But pretty early on in one's career, one has to decide which end of that spectrum one's going to gravitate towards. You are very clearly a conviction politician. Did you always know you'd be one? And do you agree with me when I say that people who go into Parliament thinking that being a backbencher is a chore and they're doing it only because they want to be a minister are likely to end up very unhappy for a number of reasons?
I do, Julian, and I should have said earlier, I want to pay tribute, ladies and gentlemen, to my two colleagues. I'm going to start with Maria first. You know, she's not only a fantastic member of Parliament, but she's a nurse. And she's a nurse who was there on the front line during the pandemic. Absolutely wonderful. And my goodness, Maria, when I think what a tough battle you had to win that seat back for our party, following on from someone who was very hands-on, another party in the constituency. My goodness, you had a tough battle. But it's a fabulous constituency. But how on earth do you manage to be such an active member of Parliament and a nurse as well, who, whatever time constraints you have, you're out there on the front line. So very big thank you to you for all you do. And Julian, you are amazing because you are held in high esteem in Westminster because you're straightforward, you're clear thinking, you're honourable through and through, and you are a conviction politician and a man of integrity. And I won't go on about it anymore, but you are greatly admired, and your long service in the House of Commons has stood you extremely well. And I do think that, not Maria, but the new intake would do themselves well to spend a little bit of time with you, frankly. So now to answer your point, Julian, I think that when someone really is, this is going to upset a few of our colleagues, when they've only run MPs' offices, or they've only done research, or they've only worked for the party organisation, wonderful, but I do quite like to have many colleagues who've had a proper job. And I think that those life experiences mean that they become far better politicians because they appreciate that it's not easy if you're in business to make money legally and to sustain a business through all the fashion changes we get. It's not easy to hold down a job in a profession. You know, I think that we have, I'm going to say it, too many career politicians who, frankly, they want to be Prime Minister before they've even become an MP. It is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous, to wake up in the morning. Oh, well, I'm going to do the Conservative Party a big favour. I'm going to offer my services to the party without actually analysing why they belong to a party. And then they enter Parliament and immediately they want this to be in the spotlight, and they're overly ambitious. For goodness sake, it took me about 2 or 3 years to understand the layout of the building, where the loos were, what went on in the snake's pit. You know, I mean, why don't colleagues, yeah, you get an induction course now, which I certainly never did when I was first elected, but learn something about the place, spend time with the wonderful clerks of the House, about parliamentary procedure, understand, dare I say, Maria, what whipping is all about, what government programmes are about. But are they, immediately they want to be at the dispatch box. And very, very few people, Julian, you and I know, are called to be leader of their party, albeit prime minister. Many are called, very few are chosen. And with some colleagues, they just don't understand their own limitations. And very, very few of us have what it takes to be prime minister, which is why I frankly will always have Margaret on a pedestal. You know, I was so lucky to be there for 2 parliaments when she was at the peak of her power before, I mean, yeah, I'm going to say it, before perhaps she developed Alzheimer's or dementia, which was all awful really at the end. But to see her at the peak of her powers, she was absolutely outstanding, way above any other prime minister. And it's such a tough job, but you know, shouldn't we initially be content being a member of parliament? Isn't that a big job in itself? Shouldn't we be content in representing our constituents initially? So, yeah, Julian, I want to see our dear party reassess really how we actually recruit people. I didn't like the engineering, I'm sorry, Maria, of all female lists, you know, getting people for the sake of it. I think it should be really according to ability, and it's up to, I mean, let's face it, over half of the selection committees consist of women in any case. But I don't know, Maria, did you find at your selection meeting that it was ladies who were less keen on you than the gentlemen, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. And I think most of the female MPs on our side are not necessarily in favour of all women shortlists, because they want to be chosen on ability and being the best candidate. Because, you know, certainly from my experience of being a candidate, you know, it isn't just about picking even the best person. You have to have a synergy with your constituency. And, you know, I might be right for Lewis, but be terrible for a constituency, you know, somewhere else in the country. So it's about being the best person to represent that particular area. And so, you know, certainly many of my fellow colleagues, female colleagues, are not particularly keen on going down the Labour route of all women shortlist, because we want to be chosen on merit. Because at the end of the day, you've got to win an election on merit. You know, people will choose who they want to be their MP. So, and I don't think it does women any favours, because very often then people will think, oh, you've only been chosen because you're a woman. And you know, Margaret, as you mentioned, Margaret Thatcher, you know, I watched and read her biography, the struggles she had to get selected. Yeah. But once she did, you know, her ability, you know, was enough to carry her forward. So, and I'm just interested, because obviously both of you served under Margaret Thatcher, just to know kind of how different that was, because, you know, I've only kind of read books about it or seen documentaries, and it must have been an amazing experience to serve under her during those years.
Maria, can I bring Julian on this question about Margaret? Julian, can you tell everyone when you and I met?
Okay, yes, because I missed out on serving in Parliament under Mrs. Thatcher, sadly, though I was working in the research department of the party headquarters during that last terrible year when she was defenestrated by people that she thought were her friends, colleagues and allies. But you and I first met under slightly curious conditions because the Labour Party was in the 1970s being infiltrated by an organization whose real name was the Revolutionary Socialist League, but it was much better known as the Militant Tendency.
Yes.
And these were Trotskyist revolutionaries who were entering into local Labour parties and deselecting, because if you got a couple of dozen activists in there, it was often enough to do the job, deselecting moderate Labour MPs like the late Reg Prentice, who was a Labour cabinet minister, but who faced being ousted from Parliament because his own constituency party had been subverted, taken over, and was going to deselect him. And as I thought it was important that we have a respectable and responsible opposition, not a bunch of loonies who might one day win an election, on the basis of the swing of the pendulum, I decided, though a Conservative, to join the Newham Northeast Labour Party with a colleague who was a legal expert to see if our combined efforts could do something to save Mr. Prentice. The trouble was that he had got rather disillusioned with the Labour Party by then, and he didn't particularly welcome our help. So instead of standing as an independent, which he had been going to do, he went the whole hog and joined the Conservatives. And when the 1979 election was precipitated by one vote, as it was, you could argue it was Mr. Prentice's vote that ushered in the era of Margaret Thatcher. And you and I met at an event in Newham, and you said something to me like, do you remember what it was?
No, remind me.
It was something like, well, I don't quite know what you're doing in the Labour Party, but it's certainly helpful to people like me. But in reality, it wasn't so much that I was trying to help the Conservatives. I was trying to prevent the country ending up with a subverted opposition. So that's rather a long story, but it was 1977 when we first met.
So you see, Maria, because I was born in the London Borough of Newham, and I fought a council seat in 1974, the GLC seat in 1977. So I was sort of running the Conservative Party, Newham Northwest, and I fought the 1979 election. This is how Julie and I came together, and it was all about Margaret Thatcher. And she, absolutely, I made her first party political broadcast with her when she was the leader of the opposition, went down to Elm Street Film Studios. Wait for this, Julian. The party political broadcast consisted of a baby in a cot with a ball and chain round its foot, which represented the Labour debt. And I mean, it was only a plastic one and all the rest of it, but she was absolutely marvellous. And then we took a little bunch of flowers down to her Flood Street when things progressed for her. And I will never get my excitement when she won that election. But did I think that I would be a colleague of hers in 1983? I didn't. And of course, Julian, Reg then came down to Basildon for me, and I was able to say he was Labour, now he's Conservative. And that election, which it was the SDP throwing their hat into the ring, which was so helpful as well. But Margaret was, without any question, Maria, the most outstanding politician I've ever met. She was just remarkable in her determination against all odds to do the right thing. And she changed our country and she changed the world together with Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev for the best. And she was an absolute workaholic. And unfortunately, that did for her health at the end, because it's absolutely true. She didn't have a lot of sleep. She didn't eat an awful lot. She was completely driven. And I can see her now walking through the lobbies, which were always packed. And it was like she had this blue electric shimmer around her. And, you know, the Prime Minister's going through with the PPS following it. It was an enormous event. But she wasn't as some elements in the media painted her. She felt that the little things in life counted. She was very interested in your personal life. If you were in some difficulty, you get a little handwritten note from Margaret, health, your private life. She really did care about her colleagues, and she saw the huge decay that was happening in Britain at the time. And as Julian has articulated so well, what was going on with the Labour Party. And Maria and Julian, did we ever think that fast forwarding it, we would still have the left wing through momentum rampant today? Absolutely extraordinary. And I think the lessons which I would hope prime ministers I have to be careful, prime minister today should learn from Margaret. There's no substitute for hard work. There's no substitute for keeping in touch with your backbenchers. And it's not good enough just doing it through Zoom meetings and all the rest of it, but try and bring some sincerity into this with colleagues. I think whoever's the leader should take a bit of interest in colleagues on a personal level, really. And that's what Margaret was able to do. And I think above all else, have conservative policies. So Margaret wasn't just the sale of council houses, buying shares, dare I say, Julian, nuclear weapons as a deterrent and all that. You're at the front of the campaign there with Olga Maitland and Anne Widdecombe and all the rest of it. So I think whoever is the leader of our party, you should have, as Margaret did, a real effective think tank with policies which can energize and enthuse the nation. Because although we're going through a wonderful time at the moment due to the Brexit vote of 2019, and dare I say, having a weak opposition because they are still weak, there will be some tough times and we need to be ready for it.
Can I put a challenge to you, David? When I was a lot younger and quite headstrong and fighting my first election in 1983 in my hometown, which I couldn't win, I was very dismissive of something that a cabinet minister, the late Francis Pym, had said, which was Conservatives had better be careful they don't get too big a majority, because that can actually hamper the quality of government. I'm now, and I'm not referring to having a large majority, particularly at the moment, but over many years, I've come to the view that sometimes it's good to have a majority of a few dozen, but not too many, because that does give the parliamentary party a degree of leverage. You don't want to be in a situation like we were, where a handful of rebels can be constantly holding the party to ransom, even if on that particular occasion you and I might have agreed with the rebels over Brexit and indeed been amongst their number. But in general, you know, the government needs a working majority. But would you agree with me that it's not a bad thing if that working majority is at least vulnerable to a significant rebellion, because sometimes governments do tend to try and push their parties in directions which a wide swathe of party opinion isn't happy with?
Well, I totally agree with you, Julian. I think with big majorities, governments become complacent and take their members for granted. And when I was elected in 1983, we had a huge majority, but Margaret actually didn't take us for granted. So I think there is a big lesson to be there. Now, we never want to get into the shambles that we did from 2017 to 2019, when we actually threw away our majority and we had 20 or 30 colleagues holding us to ransom. But I do think huge majority. You see, look at those terrible Labour years from 1997 to 2010. Blair, with nearly 400 members of Parliament, introduced the guillotine. Maria, I don't know if you're aware, they had so many members. When you went through the division lobbies, there only used to be 2 desks there. But it was taking so long to get Labour through that they introduced the 3rd desk. And it was Blair who introduced the guillotine. I mean, colleagues now wouldn't want to know what a filibuster was. But we used to be able to speak for 5 hours, no problem, you know, interjecting against one another. The first committee bill that I was on, which introduced rate capping, we sat for 150 hours. We had 2 all-night sittings. Now, if the debate goes on for more than an hour, we're all annoyed. Got to get away, got to get away. What we're getting away for, I do not know. I mean, to get on the computers and internet. So, yeah, I think majorities are very, very significant. And of course, Julian, I think the other thing that you're alluding to is that if the government is wary of its backbenchers, and frankly, Maria, the 22 should be listened to and more powerful than it appears to be at the moment. When I started, Edward DeCamp was in charge of it, and he sort of was promoting Margaret Thatcher. And it doesn't feel now as if the 22 has got the power that it once did. And I query that a bit. And with so many new colleagues, Julian, they've got nothing to compare it with, have they, really? And I think, yeah, I'm going to say this. I think, obviously, with over 100 new colleagues, it's a huge number of votes. And to use the power in one way, just to promote individuals, is not quite the right way, really. I want them to help develop policies, etc. I think I feel very sorry for them that they've arrived when Parliament isn't properly functioning, and I think they might have got into ways which need changing. But as Julian, I think, is hinting at, yes, they might be feeling, oh, we've got a big majority, we can't be taken for granted, but that majority needs to be put to good effect. And I know we're setting up all these policy groups and other matters. You know, I'm always on the folks listening to this broadcast. I don't mind you knowing, here's an iPhone. I've always got the MP's WhatsApps on it, although I don't often say anything, but I can see what they're up to. And I think that's a good way to communicate, but I hope we're going to have more one-to-one contact. Are you finding it difficult, though, Maria, as a whip, which is also what Julian was, I think, hinting at as well, not having too much control of colleagues? I mean, you don't seem to have as much patronage as you once did. You know, what it cost me to buy my knighthood would bankrupt most people. Only joking, folks.
I mean, it is difficult being a whip when, you know, most colleagues are, you know, away from the estate. And so normally, you know, just in the few years, obviously, before COVID, you know, just being in the tea room or the smoking room or the library, you catch up with people pretty quickly and get a sense of the mood of colleagues. It's really difficult when everyone's, you know, at home, and you might do a quick call or a quick Zoom, but also for welfare of colleagues, you know, a bit like we were saying with Margaret Thatcher, you know, things are happening in people's lives, and because they're not coming onto the estate, you don't pick up if someone's not quite themselves, or if something's happened, a bereavement or some problems in the constituency. It's very hard to pick up on that when you're not seeing people on a daily basis. And Zoom's great for getting information and briefings out there, but it's no substitute for kind of that face-to-face. And I think what I miss most at the moment is the voting lobbies, and when you were able to kind of catch up with a minister, or just grab someone to talk about a particular concern you might have. Just those few minutes in the voting lobbies is all about networking and not networking for networking's sake, but just being able to not having to book an appointment with a PPS to kind of get a tea room served. You could just grab someone and say, what do you think about this, or would you sign this amendment, or whatever. You just can't do that at the moment, and I think the new intake have missed all of that. And that's I think in your first year or so, it's kind of building those bridges, making those connections, and that takes time to do. And I'm only really seeing the benefit of it now as an MP who's been there for over 5 years. It takes a while to build that up, so I do feel sorry for the new intake colleagues, because that's just not been their experience since they've been elected.
Well, Julian, were you a PPS?
No, I was a whip for a year in opposition, and then I was a shadow defence minister for a long time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Julian, and chime in. I want to ask Maria this, because I was a PPS for nearly 10 years. I was signed up to Michael Portillo, and for a while, Lord Skelmersdale, and Edwina, which was fantastic.
Did your eyes meet across a crowded room?
Well, when I stood up to make my maiden speech and I said, Mr. Speaker, it's a great honour to address the House for a first time, and Edwina piped up, and about time too. But we ended up being great friends, and I hugely admired her. But Maria, why is it now that people become PPSs immediately? I mean, look, this is going to upset colleagues, but how can you be a PPS before you know much about Parliament? I don't understand it. I mean, perhaps the job has changed. Is it that people ask for these jobs, or it's trying to keep them on side, or the rest? I don't understand it, because certainly, Julian, the reason I was asking you, it used to be quite a big thing to be a PPS, and you had to wait a few years before you became a parliamentary private secretary. But nowadays, everyone seems to be a PPS.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure, because obviously I've only got my own experience. So from my intake, which was the 2015 intake, I think there were some that were made PPSs probably just after 6 to 9 months. And so that's kind of always what I've known, is that, after, 6 to 9 months, people will start to take on those roles. But I kind of do agree with you. And just when I sit on the front bench doing my whip's duties now, I kind of look back, and I think sometimes people are in such a rush to get a position. Yeah. And actually, once you're either it's different, slightly different if you're a PPS, but you can't speak to your department. Yeah. But once you're a whip or a minister, it really does. I miss being able to speak in the chamber, which is probably why they put me in the whip's office, so I don't speak in the chamber. But I really miss that ability, and I think people sometimes take it for granted and are so focused on getting another role, that I think it's such a privilege to be able to raise issues, take parts in debates, and if you do that too quickly, you haven't established yourself in terms of being able to have that confidence to speak, to intervene, because what they are at the moment, because of COVID, is just a series of speeches. There isn't really any debate happening at the moment. And I think new colleagues won't have seen that. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to proper debates where you can intervene, challenge, try and kind of push the opposition to kind of pin them down on a position. And that seems to have gone at the moment. And people are in such a rush to become a certain role, they kind of miss the kind of the work of just being an MP is so important.
Yeah, I think so. Maria, I miss not hearing you speak because although you're not sort of like Fiona Bruce, but I always regarded you as being so brave with your views. You would stand there, have your say bravely, with some people on the other side not looking too pleased about everything. I mean, Julian, do you agree that people seem to get these things too quickly?
Well, I want to make a couple of points related to this. I mean, one is I've got no doubt at all that part of it, especially in periods when the government has had a very small majority, part of it has been to keep people on side. I mean, not only did the number of PPSs increase considerably, but also some years ago, I think under the Cameron regime, of which I was not a fan in the coalition years, we had a big increase, for example, in the number of vice chairmen of the Conservative Party. And the key thing that all these things have in common is that if you're tempted to speak out or differ from the party line as laid down from on high, then you've got to resign from something. And so if you create jobs and titles, you make it less likely that people will be rebellious. But having said that, I want to ask both Maria and especially you, David, whether you agree with me on a brighter note, which is whenever I've been asked what in my 24 years in Parliament, which doesn't begin to compare with your nearly 40 years, David, but what in my 24 years in Parliament has surprised me the most. And I've always said that that's easy. It is the fact that I never expected to say this, but it is the fact that you should never write off any other parliamentary colleague, because when you least expect it, someone with whom you might have disagreed over more than 9 out of 10 issues will take you by surprise and speak out on something which you find yourself shoulder to shoulder with that person. And I can think of all sorts of unlikely alliances that have happened in the most unexpected way. And so I've learned that no matter how much I disagree with a colleague, I should never sort of condemn them to the outer darkness, because there is always more to somebody and more facets and dimensions than you would expect, and they will surprise you in a favorable way.
No, I agree with you entirely, and I'm going to answer the question, Julian. But Maria, I wanted to also mention, I'm going to answer the question about select committees. Now, Julian has been a brilliant chairman of a select committee. And of course, it was Norman St. John Stevers who started the procedures. But if he were alive today, he'd be absolutely staggered how powerful they are. So there we were. A little while ago, the state opening of Parliament, which of course wasn't quite as we had always known and enjoyed it. It wasn't the state opening, our proceedings, which were the news on the day. It was the 2 select committees which were in the news. Now, I don't understand, Maria, how it is that we've got all these colleagues eager to get onto select committees, and then the next minute, we've got vacancies. I mean, what on earth is this about? I was on the Health Select Committee because I regarded it as a great honour, again, for nearly 10 years, you know, and it's like MPs. Julian's right. I'm in my 4th decade. Nowadays, we've only got MPs for 5 or 10 years. But Julian, your point about alliances with people and not writing them off, well, it's not your direct point, but did I ever think that Jeremy Corbyn would become leader of the Labour Party? I had written him off. You can't believe it. And you just never know. Although, is there anything I agreed with Jeremy about? No, I support West Ham. He supports Arsenal. No,
What about Brexit?
Oh,
He was
yes.
he was without Jeremy Corbyn. If you had had what should we say, a Blairite as leader of the Labour Party, do you think that Brexit in name only wouldn't have been the result rather than the real Brexit that Boris managed to secure?
Very, very good point. And again, Maria, you see, what Julian is flushing out here is that you can get things done as a backbencher. And if you work with colleagues on issues and understand procedures, you can get legislation onto the statute book. So, Julian, were you still in, had you become an MP when Maxwell
Hislop?
Yes. Yeah.
Robin Maxwell. No, he was just before my time, I think.
Oh, well, he was an expert in parliamentary procedure, wasn't he? I mean, the table office, every time he went in there, that they were trembling because he could tell them what to do. And who was the other guy who'd worked in the Rhodes? Robert Rhodes.
Rhodes James.
Yes, Cambridge.
Yes, that's right.
He was an expert. Well, Maria, we don't have any of these people now. But you can get, the Queen's speech and good luck to the 20 names that have been drawn out of the hat in the private members bill, which once happened to me, but you can still get legislation on. So, Julian, I've supped with the devil to get things done. And I mean, on a serious note, I don't just think, oh, you're Labour, you're awful. It's about the human being, really. And I think there are any sorts of issues that we can work together. And where you are right, Julian, you don't write a colleague off because they've never been in government, or everyone thinks, well, they're not really up to it and they're getting on a bit and they can't join the government. Something suddenly happens and it changes all that. And of course, Julian, you and I know whoever is the occupant of number 10, it all changes. The king is dead. The queen is dead. Long live the king. Long live the queen. So that's why I just smile when I see the way some colleagues are going with this individual and that individual, and it all comes around. But yeah, it's wonderful how you can build alliances with things. And you see, Julian, you with your committees, you do travel abroad, don't you, dare I say? From time to time.
Well, up until this year, we generally did, and we were able to build links overseas. And of course, the key thing about these committees is that they only succeed because they are non-partisan and work across party. Any committee that keeps dividing on party lines is ineffective. The only reason they have the influence they have is that when they do conduct an inquiry and produce a report, they're able to say, this is a cross-party committee which has unanimously agreed that such and such is wrong and such needs to be done to put it right.
And isn't it, Julian, on those trips abroad that you always find out what colleagues are really like?
Oh, you do. Yes, it is true that you get to know people more out of office hours inevitably when you're traveling.
With them for a while, you always find out who's always late, keeping the bus going and all the rest of it. So I hope, Maria, we can get the message across to all these new colleagues who are frightened of going abroad because they think there's going to be some terrible story in the newspaper. We are national politicians and we need to travel a bit. Now, you're only allowed, folks, 2 more questions each. So, Maria.
Well, I'll plant a question that's relevant to my constituency, because we talked about obviously Margaret Thatcher, but another great woman was obviously Dame Vera Lynn, who was a constituent of mine, and I know you're leading the campaign for a memorial for her. So, did you just want to talk through how you got involved in that? And kind
Thank
of what's
you for giving me the opportunity to plug Vera. Okay, Maria, a very close friend of mine lived next door to Vera. So there was that immediate connection. And Vera and her family contacted me about the charities a long while ago now, the children's charities, which I'm sure you know about. And then, of course, it's no secret that Tom, Vera's daughter's husband, I think he's a counsellor, isn't he?
Yeah,
now?
he is. Yeah, yeah.
So
Tom
he's very involved. So they got me to talk to a gathering socially, and Vera was there. But of course, the bond was, I was born in West Ham, Vera was born in East Ham. Vera lived to 103, my mother lived to be 104. Very, very similar backgrounds in terms of the way they were brought up. And my parents, of course, who saw action in the war, you know, my father was in the army, my mother was in the land army. The voice of Vera Lynn was absolutely central. So it was just, as far as I was concerned, obvious that when Vera died, I very much wanted to see a memorial to her. And because of the family connection, without interfering, I should have left it to you, Maria. I should have said, no, Maria Caulfield's a local MP. She should take the back. So I hope you didn't take offence at that, Maria. But
no, I think it's amazing that, you know, there's Natalie Elphick in Dover who's part of it herself, and it just shows that, you know, she's a national treasure, and you know, it'd just be amazing to see a memorial just to remember her by.
So you're letting me give it a plug. We were going to have the memorial in London. It's now the White Cliffs of Dover, and they've got a wonderful scheme on the Western Heights. It's the Bowl. And the idea is that they're going to build a natural amphitheatre, if that makes sense. When I say they're going to clear the trees, they're saplings. And you will be able to see Vera's statue from the channel like that. And when you go to the amphitheatre, and they've got ambitious schemes, a cable car and all sorts of other opportunities, and there will be live theatre, sing songs, you name it, and Vera will be looking all over it. And then on ground level in Dover, they're going to have a permanent exhibition, because as you can imagine, a lady of 103, now I've got umpteen bits of clutter, well, she's got it everywhere. And the idea with the wonderful sculptor, Paul Day, it will tell a story. So to give it a plug, the launch will be on the 18th of June, and we're going to have a live launch on the White Cliffs of Dover. And there will also be a video recording with a few surprise guests, because all the money is going to be raised from the general public, not from the taxpayer. So thank you for giving me that opportunity, Maria. But it will be your constituents, of course, who will be at the forefront of all this. And they are very grateful for Maria for the support that you've given them. Julian.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. And what I'd like to ask you to conclude then, David, is how long did it take you to write your book, and where are the proceeds going from its vast sales?
Thank you. Well, it's taken as long as I've been an MP to write the book. I'm being serious now. I didn't think I'd still be here, you see, as an MP, that is. So I was doing it as I went along, and I did think that the Basildon story would be it, but it wasn't. You know, you can't plan life. You try to, don't you? But you never know what's going to happen. So we've had my secretary, who died at the age of 95. I've still got her typewritten notes, you see, for the first draft of it. And that is why, Julian, I updated it and included the diary about Brexit and the other bits in it. So it was sort of like a working progress to make it more current. And you've asked me about the charities. We've got 3 charities. Now, Maria, you're into medical stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah. I'd never heard. Do you know much about endometriosis?
I know, yeah, I know a little bit about it. Painful condition, and obviously has consequences for women having children, and yeah, so it's quite a common condition.
I'd never heard of it until a constituent came to me explaining all about it. Although I've got a son and 4 daughters, I didn't know anything about, but I know a lot about it now, and set up the all-party parliamentary group for endometriosis, and a third of the money goes to that particular charity. And then, Julian, we chaps aren't so careful about our health, are we, as ladies are? And I had another constituent who came to me about prostate cancer. And through having some therapy, he's been cured. So his charity is called Prostate, and part of the money is going to that. And the final charity that I'm supporting, now, Maria and Julian, you must have in your constituencies groups of people with learning difficulties. So I've got a marvelous constituent called David Stanley, and he was a deputy head of one of our local schools together with his wife. They're both members of the Salvation Army, and they both hit on this, it's not an idea, it's a fact, that through the power of music, you can transform the lives of people with learning difficulties. And it's a real tearjerker when you talk to the family and the friends of these people with learning difficulties whose lives have been transformed through music. You know, when I first started, Julian, I'll never forget going to a mental health centre in South Ockenden and seeing people in straitjackets. Now, how along the path we've come these days. And these wonderful people, they performed a concert at the London Palladium. I did the Bruce Forsyth Act. Then they went on to the Royal Albert Hall, which was absolutely fantastic. Our colleague Penny Morden, she was a disability minister at the time. She was in one of the boxes. And we're going on to Broadway. Pat's playing at the Carnegie Hall. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, we would have already been there. So look, ladies and gentlemen, I really value the time this evening that my colleagues and friends, Maria and Julian, have spent with me. Here's the book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. Please buy it, because the money isn't going into my pocket, but it's going to support the 3 charities. And finally, I would say to the constituents in your 2 respective constituencies, they are so blessed to have you as their members of parliament. You are absolutely wonderful in the way you represent your constituents and the way that you present arguments in the House of Commons. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for viewing this. It's not a podcast, it's a video this evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Well done, David.
This is my journey so far. Where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.